Okay, this is a question then to the council leaders. This is one for Kieran and Nick. How do you see the biggest political and regulatory barriers to delivering zero carbon in the local plans?
Um, I'm happy to start, Andrew, if you'd like.
That's good. Yep.
Do you mind if I just introduce myself a little bit first?
Absolutely. Please do. I'm
I'm
just
Kieran
trying to see if I
Wilson.
can find you.
I don't know if I'm on the screen, so
Oh, there we go. Got them
We
now.
see everyone. Okay.
That's great.
okay.
Excellent.
I'm Kieran Wilson, portfolio holder for housing and regulatory services at BCP Council. I've held the role over two periods. The first of which was back in 2019, during which I actually raised the minimum environmental standards on new developments that we as a council brought forward, which led to a letter of commendation from Dame Jane Goodall. And as a result of that approach, you have major housing projects such as the Hillbourne project that Andrew referenced in his presentation, which is building 110 socially rented homes to passive house principles and adding millions of pounds in social value to the local area. Firstly, I just want to say as well, I've really enjoyed the presentations tonight. I felt like I've learned a lot, both in terms of factual information, but also ideas to be taken away. I've really liked Andrew's suggestion of a Dorset Innovation Centre that builds a local skill base to tackle these issues and get these zero carbon homes built. In fact, and it kind of touches upon the question, I've suggested to many of our local MPs since the election a year ago now that they should be doing something similar on a national scale. You know, Ian touched upon it in his presentation around the construction industry. Since 2008, we have 20% less people within the construction industry, which in pure numbers is around 250,000 workers less than 17 years ago, which is part of the reason why building locally is so expensive. And I think and feel that the government have a real opportunity to fix that by filling that gap with young apprentices and creating, a strong green building economy. There's been very little tonight that I disagree with or wouldn't want to see happen. But I think there are so many challenges and obstacles in our way. Um, you know, these things aren't happening in a vacuum. Local authorities have been an afterthought for successive governments for years now, and as a result, we're seeing a lack of funds and a lack of resources to do the extra things that we want to do. And whilst the cost of new build is expensive, but we're taking that expense on, knowing that we need to. Because we're going to have to foot that expense in the future anyway, when the government eventually get round to properly regulating and properly putting the emphasis on us. So is retrofitting. And just to give an example, we're currently going through an exercise to improve the standards of our stock. So we're going through a stock condition survey. And just to get all of our stock to a Band C EPC rating, it's going to cost around £7 million. If we wanted to get the majority of our stock to zero carbon, we'd be talking about billions of pounds, which for a housing revenue account with a very small surplus isn't going to happen without national government subsidies. And that's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of challenges. But I think it is so important that we do all we can on this agenda. Last year, I went to visit local residents who had just settled into some new passive homes at Alice Gardens in Poole, another scheme that we've built. And the joy and the gratitude that they had in being in such quality homes was so heartwarming. And as Sam referenced in his presentation, the difference it makes to our residents' lives to have such quality homes means that we should be doing everything we possibly can to kind of push that envelope. So yeah, I think hopefully that touched upon the question and also gave myself a little bit of an introduction.
So, Kieran, are you going to have zero carbon in your new local plan, which is being developed now?
Well, I think that's definitely up for discussion. I think that's one of the benefits. the way the local plan has happened, and the fact that we haven't been able to pass it through the inspectorate, obviously it's disappointing, but it's given us the opportunity to go back to the drawing board and have these discussions. And I think that it's definitely something that we need to be looking at.
Excellent. Nick, do you want to give your spin on this?
Yeah, so I'm Nick Ireland. I'm the leader of Dorset Council, and I look after climate and environment and a few other things as well. We are really ambitious about reducing our carbon footprint in terms of Dorset Council's area. 20% of our carbon in Dorset Council's area are our homes, heating homes essentially. The other 10% is businesses in terms of their buildings. We have brought our net zero target forward by 5 years last year to 2045. So it's complete madness to build houses now that aren't EPC-A, aren't net zero, and cost people money for the next 100 years to heat. We shouldn't be doing that. We haven't got a local plan as such. We inherited the ones from the predecessor councils. So West Dorset, Weymouth, and Portland, those sort of plans, they were all written basically the early years of the last decade and not fit for purpose. The previous administration for Dorset Council didn't manage to get a local plan in. They consulted back in 2021, I believe, and it never went anywhere. So we've had to start from scratch, which gives us the opportunity to embed all the good stuff we've been talking about tonight into our local plan. I can't see any reason why we won't be doing that. We are going out to consultation on the 18th of August is the current date. That won't be the plan as such. It's it's the consultation on the sites, and it won't list all the policies. It's an opportunity for people to respond, and I've got a must list of things that need to be in our local plan, most of which have been talked about tonight, and I'm sure you all do and your members. So I would basically tell you to respond and put everything you can possibly want into the consultation responses. Addressing the actual question about regulatory challenges, it'd be helpful if the Future Home Standard came out. It would be helpful to know exactly where planning is going. We don't know yet. There's a slight risk that Labour may turn around and we'll have to start again from scratch at some point. There's various gateways we've got to meet. Some clarity from central government would be useful, to be honest. But I think in planning there never is. And there's people on this call who do a lot more about planning than I do. So it's a challenge, but the local plan, our deadline is to go to the inspector in December next year. We'll have a new local plan hopefully by this time, 2027. So in the meantime, our housing numbers fall off the cliff in October because the new housing numbers kick in. Our fix disappears. So it's going to be a bit of a Wild West speculative situation from October onwards, I'm afraid. That's the way it is without a local plan.
Thanks, Nick. That's great. Tim, could you let us know what you're doing at Dorset Community Energy in terms of zero carbon housing?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm Tim Crabtree. I chaired Dorset Community Energy. We set up in 2013 with the help of Dorset County Council at the time. And we've installed PV on about 30 different types of buildings, schools and hospitals. I think one of the sort of significant elements of that is that we have managed to raise funding from local people for these initiatives. So we've raised £1 million through 4 share offers, and that's been matched against £500,000 that Dorset Council has been able to bring in as grants through Low Carbon Dorset. So I think that illustrates this sort of potential of kind of community council partnerships. We did the initial feasibility work on the microgrid for Hazelmead, and we see real potential for those sort of schemes to be sort of further developed. I actually work for Wessex Community Assets, and the last 20 years, again, we've been working with local councils to support the development of community land trusts across Dorset. And yeah, in that respect, there's 2 things I would mention. One is that we've been working with a range of architecture practices and the University of Plymouth to look at construction methods that have net zero embodied carbon In that we've been working with local farmers on, for example, growing hemp, which I know Greencore also use. And I think that there's a potential sort of benefit in integrating local materials into innovative construction methods. I think that's something we should be exploring more. The last thing I'd say is just on reflection from what people were saying. We were lucky with the co-housing project in Bridport because there was a benign landowner who was prepared to sell that land to the Community Land Trust. I think there's been an interesting shift around compulsory purchase and local authorities who might exercise that power not having to pay hope value on that land, but paying agricultural value. And I think that's a really important shift, and I'd hope that Dorset Council would be exploring that further. I think the other significant thing for me about Hazelmead is the integration of shared ownership, because prior to that, the community land trusts across Dorset have all been social rented schemes delivered as a partnership between the CLT and a housing association. And I think one of the important things about Hazelmead is the way in which the CLT has developed its own sort of, percentage of that development. I think it's 13 of the houses are owned by the CLT, something like that.
It's
The rest of
14.
the 14. The rest of the shared ownership is delivered by Bournemouth Churches Housing Association, and then about half the scheme is social rented. So I think that would be a really important shift for Dorset Council to acknowledge the importance of integrating sort of shared ownership into CLT schemes. Lots more that I could say, but that's probably enough.
Thanks, Tim. That's lovely. Sam, you got something?
Oh no, I was just supporting Tim's take on
Oh yeah, putting a thing.
getting
Okay.
shared ownership in CLT schemes, because one of the challenges of Hazelmead was the sort of idiosyncrasy of its tenure. That it simply couldn't align with the kind of narrow requirements of 100% of rural affordable housing within the parish that it sits, and it's in the parish of North Allington, which is tiny, but there was huge demonstrable local need if you incorporated the parishes around it, but that didn't comply. So
Sure.
yeah,
Thank
very
you.
important point.
Yeah. Mark, could you tell us what you're doing at the Zero Carbon Trust in terms of zero carbon housing?
Zero Carbon Dorset, for anyone who's not aware, is we set out to look at what it would actually look and feel like to live in a county where we had a zero carbon scenario, where we'd solved all these problems. And we looked at housing in terms of both energy usage and energy usage in terms of both reduction and in terms of how we provide energy, which we've heard of tonight in terms of the schemes for putting PV and other things instantly on the houses. And I think it's interesting because for me, what really came through this evening is we looked at areas as well as energy and transport and food and land and education, all those sorts of things. And the things that have come out of that in our Dorset 2030 report are really echoed this evening in three key ways. I think Ian touched on it at the beginning of his presentation with respect to we are nowhere near to solving this problem. Our carbon budgets are being burnt through and we need to act much more quickly. So I think that's a key point, number one. Number two, which I think echoes really with Sam's, was one of the ways we'll solve this is through the power of community. So if you give people the right tools, the right policies, the right opportunity, they will help to make these solutions come true. And not just in a way, as we're often told, that costs a lot of money, you need to be wealthy to do this, but actually there's a social context in which if we get it right, it's to the benefit of those people and many of those people who are currently struggling. So there's a real social benefit to this. And the third thing is all the lovely community stuff we looked at all comes to a halt if you don't have the right policies in place. And so I think Will's presentation was a real snapshot of how, in the absence of the right policies at a national level, there are still opportunities to set the framework at a level locally that at least gets you to the place you want to be. So I think we've had three presentations that really echo the things we covered in that. And I think the social context, and it picks up on one of the comments or one of the questions. I think it was, I've lost it now. I think it was Glenda, maybe, apologies if it wasn't, around how we're using houses properly. I think we need to look at the social and political context of this. So why are we under this dictatorship of developers? When I drive around, I don't see the developments like Hilborn, like Bridport. I see more and more 3, 4, 5 bedroomed houses being built by developers, when we know fundamentally the need is for people who struggle with affordability. We need key worker houses, and obviously, even, you know, with an aging population, it's likely that more and more of those people will want smaller houses. So why aren't we building to what we need as citizens rather than what developers say? So I think there's a real context around how we need to really speak truth to power. And the other thing, which is slightly different, but it really fits in with the numbers, is what are we doing with the houses we've got at the moment? Because there are lots of empty houses. Are we continuing to build these houses and then put them out for Airbnbs, for holiday lets, which is a major demand in this area? How can we address some of those bigger issues that get to the core of this matter? So that's my initial thoughts from this evening.
Thanks, Mark. That's great. Will, I've got a question for you from Dorset Can. The question is, would it be possible for Dorset and BCP councils to implement the new policies being developed in Baines without having to go through the time and cost of developing their own? Could they be incorporated in the emerging local plans, or would they be rejected by the inspectors?
Yeah, well, the first thing I would say is that I would refer you to people that I've been working with at Baines. I do know that Baines have been in discussion with other local authorities in the area, so Wiltshire, South Gloucestershire, who are also kind of enthusiastic about this type of project. And so I think there is enthusiasm for sharing the policy. So I think people will be very receptive for that. And if you want to get in touch, I'm happy to point you towards the right people who can make that happen. I think from the designers and the developers' point of view, the more harmonization there is across the region in terms of these policies, the better, because there is a risk with different local authorities, each independently dreaming up different local plans to achieve the same, sorry, not local plans, but these specific sustainable construction policies. It's going to create confusion and mess. And we've seen from the results of our study that the simpler you can make things, the more consistent you can make things, the better. So I think there'd be a practical argument for harmonizing as well. So yeah, I think it should be encouraged. I think a lot of the investigations that Cornwall and Baines did together are also public. So if you look on the Baines website, there are reports, there are the kind of cost uplift analysis. It's all in the public domain. So yeah, it's but yeah, I'm sure they'd be happy to discuss how that could work.
Okay, question for you, Ian. What's the single most important thing you do to accelerate the whole process to make it scalable in terms of zero carbon?
Is that in relation to what could be done, or what could Greencore do you think?
I think what could be done, but also be interested to know what you could do.
I think the single thing that could be done would be this change to stamp duty, because it could be done next week in the June spending review. We saw during the pandemic, stamp duty can be changed very, very quickly and has a very immediate impact. So I think from a national policy point of view, that's the most important thing. For us at Greencore, it's really access to land and support of planning authorities, because we've had similar experiences to Sam that the planners are very good at policing a policy, but the policy is not in line with what we're all trying to do. And that makes it extremely hard work, and it takes months, if not years, longer than it should do to get the right sort of projects through planning.
Nick and Kieran, would you, as the leaders of your respective councils, would you be prepared to use CPO powers to try and get a supply of land? Because it seems to me that the landowners are going to hang on to everything, as much as they can. And if only we could get a supply of land at reasonable price, then all this could really work.
CPO's not that easy, to be fair. We have, for example, looked at what's known as the Hardy block on Portland. So if you know Portland, Coma Homes built refurbished a block, which is the Prince Andrew block, I believe. The other one's been empty and derelict and an eyesore for getting on for 10 years now. At least what we're doing at Dorset Council is we inherited a lot of land from the previous 6 councils, essentially. We have an assessment going on right now to determine whether that land can be built on. So every single bit of land we're looking at, if it can be built on, we'll be talking to RPs and trying to get them to actually use that land, to build genuine affordable homes, and preferably net zero and all that sort of stuff. I don't think compulsory purchase orders at the moment are something we're looking at, to be honest.
Okay, Kieran?
I think from our perspective, it's something that we're open to exploring. When we purchased Halls Bay, which was a big regeneration site in Poole, that we're looking to develop over the next few years, that was something that if we weren't able to bring it forward, and if they weren't willing to sell it, we were looking at potentially having that trigger in place. And I think the government are looking to make these things easier in terms of a process to bring land forward. But I think it's always a last resort in terms of that. And I think, just going to, I think it was Mark's point around what we're doing around empty homes as well. That's something that we're looking to explore, to bring empty homes and empty properties back into use, because within the conurbation we have thousands of empty homes at any one time. And don't get me wrong, not all of those are for a long period of time. But there are longer term ones that we're looking to focus at and trying to bring back into use. So yeah, I think it's something that we'd definitely be open to exploring. But again, like Nick said, it is quite complicated and it's not as easy as it sounds.
Sure. Tim, your hand's up.
Yeah, it was just a response to this. It's great that Dorset Council are looking at sites that they own and the potential to build on them. I guess I would say this, that over the last 30 or 40 years, we've lost 3 million homes through Right to Buy. And now this government is saying we have to build 3 million homes, to meet the demand. So there's clearly a big issue there. And, registered providers are not necessarily protected from Right to Buy. And so that's, again, where I think community land trusts become really important. If the land can be vested into a community land trust, that community land trust can then work with a registered provider, but it means that there's more protection for the land. So I would hope that Dorset Council can work with community land trusts, or support the development of new community land trusts to give that added layer of protection to the land that, is currently publicly owned. We don't want it to meet the same fate that those 3 million homes have had.
Sam?
Well, I'd sort of echo that and say that I think we know that in lots of villages and parishes and places like Hazelmead, there are landowners who would be willing to engage with the sale of their land at reduced cost if it is to serve a community land trust and if it is to provide affordable homes for people within their own community who are struggling to access housing and sustain their villages. So, I think, again, it's how policy can unlock and enable those landowners to participate within providing the solution to the problem that they want to do. It's just too difficult.
Thank you. I've got a question here from Stuart Brooks. As a property maintenance and asset management expert in social housing, has there been any evaluation of ongoing maintenance costs for net zero passive house new developments? My reason for asking, we're currently replacing air source heat pumps that have only been installed for 5 to 7 years, which is a significant concern from a maintenance perspective. Who'd like to answer that question? No one.
I'll have a go if you like.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, and I'm not aware of any cost studies, but I think this point about air source heat pumps is a good one. The government has really um, s- set its stall out around air source heat pumps as being the answer. And I was really interested to see on Sam's scheme that the heating was direct electric. A lot of the houses that we build at Greencore have direct electric heating because the heat requirement is just so low, it doesn't justify having an air source heat pump. So there is a danger, I think, of a one solution fits all scenario here. And there are many cases where you can actually save money, save maintenance costs, and save embodied carbon of things like heat pumps by actually doing a really good job of building a house. For us, the major maintenance item is around the mechanical ventilation and heat recovery system, which needs its filters either cleaning or replacing at regular intervals. And I did see there was a question in the chat about the importance of doing that. And it's absolutely true that we need to be training up new generations of people who understand. It's very simple how to do it, but you need to make sure it's properly planned, diarised, and that it's done, and it's done efficiently and economically.
Okay, I've got a question here from Ulrika Maseriello. Have any schemes been completed that fall under the new policy, which presumably means the new type of zero housing policy? Has delivery of these new homes reduced as a result? Is there a requirement to provide evidence that buildings are built as designed? Okay, so that's the thing that worries people, isn't it? As soon as you start putting in zero carbon standards, either into local plans or into anywhere, that's what the beef that the big national house builders talk about, isn't it? They don't want any more regulation. Have anybody got any comments on that? Does it reduce supply? It hasn't in Europe.
I'm assuming that might be in reference to the Baines policy specifically. Unfortunately, we haven't had the chance to see any completed homes and actually evaluate them in detail yet because we haven't had long enough to see them come through. We haven't had any applications rejected on the grounds of these policies specifically. So directly, there hasn't been a reduction in housing, but we don't know about whether there's any indirect reduction because of the increased regulation and the increased cost of putting a planning proposal in. Unfortunately, we can't compare a with and without scenario because there's so many other external factors. So I'd love to be able to do that. I think a bigger study would allow us to do it. In terms of the evidence that's required, so in Baines, there is a planning condition that you have to submit the completed, you have to resubmit the energy statement with the as completed figures. But there is some concern that, sorry, and you do that in order to discharge one of the planning conditions, which is that you meet these targets. But there is some concern that the council won't have the resources to actually police that. So there'll be a temptation for people to just submit what they submitted the first time and cross their fingers that no one will ever really have the time or resource to look it up and actually visit the buildings. So it's something that we have been discussing with them, how we could try and find shortcuts for making sure that these things are actually followed through to construction. But it is something that we've highlighted as a potential risk.
Thanks, Will. Question for you, Ian. What is the predicted life? This is a question from Ken Huggins. What is the predicted life of your new zero carbon homes?
Yes, I saw this. I think this is because they're constructed with bio-based materials. So it should be measured in centuries. So we have an awful lot of knowledge and understanding of how timber behaves in buildings. And the decay mechanisms for things like timber are insect attack or moisture, or a combination of the two, because moisture creates the conditions for insect attack. But the timber is all treated and it's all kept in a dry environment in a breathing wall structure. So providing things like roofs and gutters are maintained, the houses should last indefinitely. If gutters and roofs are not maintained, then I think you've got a wider problem, as you would have in any house, that fabric starts to deteriorate. But just because they're bio-based materials doesn't mean that they will last any a shorter period of time than the masonry buildings.
Kieran.
Just wanted to kind of ask Ian, just in terms of, obviously we're coastal towns, so would that have any effect in terms of kind of sea moisture, etc., etc.?
Yes, very good question. So things like timber, external timber, would be less appropriate, not inappropriate, but less appropriate, and would have a shorter life in a coastal environment. And it might be more appropriate to look at other sustainable cladding materials. So there's also, I think, more work to do on developing new sustainable cladding materials for coastal environments and areas where you've got high levels of weather exposure. Because at the moment, the alternatives to things like timber are quite high embodied carbon, but there are new generations of materials coming through, sort of made out of recycled plastic materials and that sort of thing. So one of the exciting things at the moment is there's a lot of innovation going on. And just because something is the best solution today doesn't mean that something better won't come along tomorrow as well. So from a policy point of view, I always urge people to specify outcomes rather than actually getting too granular about the solutions. What we're aiming for is zero carbon. We don't need to say whether that's an air source heat pump or timber cladding. It's the outcome that's important.
I've got a question from Councillor Beryl Ezard. As a member of the DCSE Planning Committee, we need policies soonest in DC to enable net zero housing to be built in Dorset. It is so frustrating to have to grant planning without any solar panels or energy saving provided. Nick, do you want to give an answer to that?
Well, Councillor Ezard is right, and the way we're going to do that is through the local plan, realistically. I don't think we have the capacity to do other stuff. The local plan is going to take up pretty much everything our planning department is doing, and we are anticipating, as I said, our housing numbers run out in October. We are anticipating a big uptick in planning applications coming forward post October, because we've seen a reduction at the moment. There's less coming in than we'd expect, so we think people are probably just saving up, and because they're going to chance the wrong. That's the reality. So
are you going to be able to step up in terms of your zero carbon in the local plan when it comes out on the 18th of August? Do you think people are going to be pleased?
The local plan, so the thing that comes out on the 18th of August is a consultation. It's not the local plan.
Okay, sure.
The local,
but are they consulting on?
It's the consulting on the local plan, on sites and stuff that we want in. It won't actually list the policies and things like that. That will be next year when we have a plan to go forward. So.
Quite a long way down the line. Okay, all right. Mark.
Yes, it is a question actually rather than a comment, but it's to both councillors again, is in terms of, obviously, as one of the presentations highlighted, the danger you have of building houses that aren't net zero is you probably have to come back in a few years' time and then retrofit them because there won't be those appropriate standards. And obviously, until we get to that stage, we still have pressure from the government and from developers to get on building the houses that they want to make the money. So the question is really what is within your power to A, delay that, or B, ensure that those houses are built with better standards than usual and people are adhering to things that are going to protect nature and local landscapes and everything in the meantime.
From a Dorset Council point of view, we have very little powers at the moment in terms of that. That's we have our local plans which are out of date, which don't have anything in them that we could even hang anything on, to be honest. So we're in a bit of between a rock and a hard place until we get a local plan.
I mean, in BCP, we're in a similar position, but we have control over what we deliver ourselves. And so we're always trying to deliver as high environmental standards as we possibly can, whilst balancing, obviously, viability and the cost of trying to deliver in a very challenging market currently. And I do get so as I said in my introduction, we've tried to raise environmental standards as high as possible, and I do get challenged from opposition members and kind of unaligned independent members around the cost of it. It does cost substantially more to do that, and we could be delivering a few more homes and getting more people off our housing register. So that is something that you have to weigh up. But as you say, Mark, it's something that 5-10 years down the line we're going to have to retrofit, and we're going to have to pick up that cost anyway. So I think it's that what's the saying, a stitch in time saves nine, and I really do think that is the case with zero carbon housing.
Do people feel there's any appetite within the big house builders to really change? I've attended a number of webinars with people like Barratt's and other big developers, but it seems to be the supply chains that they've got are sort of embedded, and it's difficult to make them change. It's okay for people like Greencore to do things, but for the really big boys, that they're sort of making super profits, and why should they stop? Anybody comments on that?
I can just comment on so there's a big development outside Bridport, Veers Farm. I think it's been renamed as something else now, but I can't remember who it might be Barratt's. It's one of the big companies anyway.
Sure.
I was on the planning committee for West and South for the last 5 years until we took power last year. They came back to change the phasing. They basically came back to try and bring more houses in the first phase rather than the second phase, because at the time the government at the time had that rule about not being able to fit gas boilers, which I think is just about to come back in again. But they basically wanted to build more houses with gas boilers rather than heat pumps or direct electric heating. And we should be building houses now which are fit for the future, and it's plainly clear that they don't want to do that.
So there's a sort of standoff, isn't there? It seems to be that they're putting a lot of pressure on the government to delay the new home standard. Kieran.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that in terms of I think it differs from building from developer to developer, but generally I think it needs regulation, and it needs the government to say you have to do it. It's like that with any business, any industry, unless the government incentivize or put regulation on it, it doesn't come to fruition. You look at for example BP, when who changed their approach to climate change, after a change of administration in America. It's politics that sets the agenda, and I think unless the government say we need this, there isn't the incentive or the push from developers to do it.
I mean, I think it falls upon the innovation of people like Ian and community groups like at Hazelmead to demonstrate to people that there is the possibility of doing something better and something different. And then within the consumer society within which we exist, if people see that there is the reality of better and different, then there's a hope that there may be a higher level of demand. Clearly, that hasn't worked at scale by any stretch of the imagination. But I think it is important to have these real life lived examples to say how much extra value that they're adding in a holistic way. And for us to sort of generally change, we need a change of position from seeing ourselves as consumers to citizens, don't we? There's a bigger political, social, economic mindset shift that needs to happen pretty urgently, because the market has failed, and it will continue to do so when it's solely profit that is driving it.
Will.
Yeah, I mean, I think we are about to see this kind of thing tested. So in Baines, we've had a couple of applications which are several hundred homes, but it might not be what you're imagining in terms of a kind of suburban development. It's more brownfield development with 5 or 6 story buildings and flats and they're having to comply with these net zero targets now. I think where it is going to be very interesting is places like Bristol and South Gloucestershire, where there are very, very large developments going on a scale that's totally different to Baines, where these policies are making their way through local plans now. And, these things are going to collide, and you're going to get these big suburban or greenbelt developments being subject to these policies. And it'll be very interesting to see what happens in the next maybe year or two.
Kieran.
I just wanted to come back and really agree with Sam. I think it is a mind shift change within the culture in the country, and I think that's not just in terms of zero carbon homes, but just homes in general. I think you've referenced, Andrew, how European countries have really are outdoing us in terms of housing in both the zero carbon agenda, but also just fundamentally their market. And I think it's because we treat housing as a commodity and they treat it as a human right. And don't get me wrong, we partially treat it as a human right, but not to the level that they do. And I think that's the real difference. And I think once that mindset shifts, which I do believe it will, because the crisis is so deep now. I think we'll see results both in terms of the quality of homes and the amount of homes and the affordability of them.
Ian.
Just the comparison to the European model. In most of Europe, the housing is delivered by individual people and SME builders. We are totally hamstrung by having over 80% of our houses in this country delivered by a handful of enormous PLC companies who have too much power. And they can dictate to government because government needs numbers of housing, and they're the people who deliver the numbers. So they can say to government, you either have quality or you have quantity. Which one do you want? And so we've got some fundamental structural problems in the way we deliver housing that are going to take many, many years to unpick if we ever do.
Need a revolution, don't we? Sam.
Up the revolution, absolutely. The Peabody Trust director came out with a piece earlier on in the week to say that if government treated housing as public infrastructure rather than an alternative, it allows them to unlock huge amounts of additional funding from central government to support the construction of better affordable housing. And I think it's things like that we need to see, and I really advocate for that, because it's clear that it is part of our public health infrastructure, and I think the downstream benefits are so huge.
Excellent. Okay. Right. We're 11 minutes over time, so that's good, isn't it? Why not? How often do you get a group of people like this together ever? So it's a brilliant opportunity. Has anybody got any more things they want to say? What have we missed out this evening? What's been missed that we should have been looking at?
And Andrew, did we want to say something about the housing standards that are coming up? Because I think one question that came out is what pressure can the team place on the government to insist that all new homes have solar or ground source heat pumps? I think there's some new standards coming in 2027, I think.
Sure. It seems to be that what pressure can we, are they consulting again on the new home standard at the moment, I think, aren't they? I think that it's the delay all the time, isn't it? So, Mark.
Yeah, it was actually a question that I don't think we sort of touched around it really, in terms of, when we're not building the types of developments we've seen highlighted this evening, and we are building lots of, big houses. There was a question about, is there a standard by which we could hold developers to account, or can we say, actually, we don't want this plot is big enough for 250 units, not 100 units. Is there any opportunity either council to impose those sorts of standards currently?
I think the easiest and well, not the easiest, but the way to do that is through the local plan and on a site by site basis, and making sure that enforced through the planning process, but it is quite difficult. And obviously, depending on the development, developers will use viability or will use mitigating circumstances to try and shape the development that is better for them. But yeah, I think the local plan is the key to that.
Michael Gove's ministerial statement of December 2023 still exists, doesn't it? So presumably, if you guys BCP are going to be difficult, then they'll just go to appeal, don't they, and go to the inspectorate.
Yeah.
So I think that one of the things they need to clear out is that ministerial statement. It seems to be difficult, to have a situation which implies that local planning authorities should not set a bar above the set standard building regs, which is a difficult one. Any more?
I've got a question which has been submitted by Jackie Copley from National CPRE, who's asked, what could CPRE National be doing to help groups progress the issue of net zero homes? So our national office have called for net zero homes to be mandated as soon as possible in the Future Homes Standard, and we do obviously have a strong sort of rooftop solar policy that we're calling for. But what else could national CPRE be doing?
That's a sort of CPRE question, isn't it? I suppose
I think it's a question from what do our panelists think that what would they suggest that we could be doing?
We do, okay, as a campaign group.
Yeah. To push for net zero.
What can we do, Kieran? We're just getting tougher.
Well, I think events like this are great. I felt like I've learned a lot tonight. Even though I am quite interested in this subject, I feel like there's been loads that I can take out of it and go and speak to my MPs about myself and the wider council. So that's really beneficial. I think for me, I always feel it's a bit of a cop-out, but I do feel national government are just, they're the drivers, and it's really important to hold them to account. And I think that's really the key. But yeah, I think the event tonight has been brilliant. So more of these.
We'll keep them coming. The next one will be on wind farms, actually. Okay. Well, we're 9:15 now. So perhaps, Linda, do you think we should fold it up now?
Yes, what I was going to add is that we will provide the presentations from tonight. We'll put them on our website, and once we've split out the recordings of the presentations, we'll put them live on YouTube so you can follow them up afterwards. We've obviously got all the various questions, and what we can do is maybe try our best offline to pick up and add answers to those as well, and circulate them in some form. So watch this space.
Yeah, apologies that for anybody who's put that forward a question that hasn't got an answer. Some people are asking questions like, what is the the standard zoning density for housing and that type of thing. So I haven't actually put those forward. So it's concentrated mainly on net zero. But thank you, all of you, very much indeed for coming this evening. Thank you to all the presenters. They're extremely interesting presentations. Gosh, I have learned a huge amount myself. And yeah, it's been a very thoughtful and heartening evening, as far as I'm concerned. And there seems to be that the speakers, panelists, and delegates, we're all on the same page, which is actually quite encouraging, isn't it? There's clearly an appetite to move beyond business as usual in terms of net zero, and to embrace the challenge and to deliver net zero in practice. We've heard today about the fact that technology exists, the design thinking is there, and the public support is growing. What's needed now, perhaps, is the political will the planning policy, and the partnerships to make it happen at a scale. It'd be great if the energy that we've got here encapsulated this evening with all these people coming along and all these experts, that all of this gets turned into action locally, regionally, and nationally. So thanks very much for coming, and your engagement's very much appreciated. Let's keep the conversation going beyond today. Hey, so there we go. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.